Good afternoon and welcome to the Women and Equalities Select Committee. Today we're looking at non-consensual intimate image abuse, and in our first panel today I'm delighted that we've got a panel of experts. We will be hearing from Professor Clare McGlynn, KC, from Durham Law School at Durham University, Professor Lorna Woods, OBE, Professor of Internet Law, School of Law at the University of Essex, and Assistant Chief Constable Samantha Millar, Strategic Programme Director, National Police Chiefs Council, Violence Against Women and Girls Task Force. Thank you very much for your time today, and welcome. So I'm going to ask David to start with questions.
Thank you very much, Chair. And my first question's to you, Assistant Chief Constable. Do you mind if I call you Sam or Samantha?
Please.
Sam. Sam, Stop NCII told us that of the victims they work with that report to the police, 4 times as many report a negative experience rather than a positive one. Why do you think that's the case?
Thank you. I think your first question gets right to the heart of it. Certainly for policing. Even yesterday, a victim said to me, that she's in a conversation with 450 victims of deep fake imagery, and 2 of those had a positive experience with policing. And so, it's deeply, deeply worrying, isn't it, that those victims, because let's be honest as well, for a woman. And these are all women. Of course, it can absolutely be a male victim, but predominantly these are women victims. The last thing in the world that they've probably got the want to do is to turn up to a police station and have that sort of evidence unpicked and looked at. So the fact that they turn up and receive a poor service means that our system, that's not about individual police officers, that is the system is failing to put the knowledge, the mindset, I'd say the specialist understanding, a response to legislation, which is pretty difficult, I think, for a generic police officer to keep in their mind. So there's something about that, for me, is a big alarm bell for policing, about how do we change that. And I have many thoughts about the infrastructure that's not in place, the way we operate holistically as a capability, to be able to get a response that I would want, of course, any victim to walk in and get. So I think we've got a journey to go on. We do not have an infrastructure that is set up to provide a service, I think, that meets the needs of this legislation. And that's what we need to build. And I'm very clear of that. I feel like I'm in a very lucky position because my mantra at the moment is, as a Strategic Programme Director for VAWG, is actually we need to bring a capability together in policing that understands the offences we're talking about. They're deeply complex to provide a service to, and that's where we're heading. So we're hoping next year that we bring a number of programmes together where we've learned lots of lessons about the complexity of dealing with victims of RASO, of rape, sexual offending, and the Online Safety Act and the legislation that brings is a whole new challenge for policing. So I sit here and I think it's utterly devastating that 450 women walked into police stations and didn't get the service that they need to. And my job with my team has got to be to build an infrastructure. I reached into a very, very normal force in the build-up to going to this committee and said, so DI, talk me through what it would look like for a victim to walk into your police station today. And we deal with these crimes inherently the same as we deal with many crimes, and that cannot be the right model. So there's something about nationally, how do you get that capability, and how does that filter down to a local delivery, because that's where all of these victims will have walked into a police station and received a pretty poor service. And in fact, the victim from last night walked into 7 police stations. Do you know? So nobody has to tell me that the service is right.
So I guess there's another quite concerning thing that we've heard during this inquiry as well, that some victims are asked by the police to leave the content online to aid investigation and prosecution. So that's obviously not great. What's being done to educate police officers on why that's the worst possible outcome for a victim?
I completely agree. I think it's a real lack of understanding of the legislation. So what do we have the power to do? But if you go back to the beginning, everything from how does an offence like this get reported? How easy is it and accessible is it for a victim to talk to police in? If you go to College of Policing, we've got guidance around the offences, but very little guidance at the moment about how do you undertake a good investigation. So what does good look like? That's why you need a national framework, because a new operating model needs to set out what a good investigation looks like. Because it can't be right that officers are failing to understand that by keeping an image online, it is just constantly re-traumatising. It is giving access. We keep things online and perpetrators are in prison. And guess what? They come out of prison and we hand devices back. So there is nothing about an investigation that is right. But policing has to understand the legislation. It has to build the guidance. It needs to then cascade the training. It needs to be understanding how that's working locally and how it's being delivered. We have not got the infrastructure that set that up to support those victims. And that is a very inadequate place to be. So you're right, our investigations are not consistent. There are plenty of occasions, though, where we do take it down and then the investigation starts. But it's that inconsistency of practice that we've got to put right. And I go back to, it's really obvious to me, having worked on the task force for 3 years, that we do not have an infrastructure built and set up to deal with online harm.
It sounds like you know what needs to be done to fix this. Is anything currently being done?
Yes.
And what is being done to improve training and guidance?
So I do think there is activity. We, from a task force, have seen from the very beginning that online harm in our threat and risk assessment that we've now done for 2 years tells us that it is a thematic priority area that we should be considering. So we have allocated resolve. We have worked across with Ofcom to understand how can we influence the guidance. We've worked with our contact management capability to understand how do we make reporting more accessible. And if I could use an example in a comparison, I also oversee policing response to spiking. So a year ago, we launched an online reporting tool which takes a victim. First of all, you don't have to walk into any police station, and it takes you through a very bespoke capability where you can report what's happening. And you just make it more accessible, and that's got to make it more straightforward for a victim. How do we not have that capability? So we're in the discovery phase at the moment with our contact management team to understand how we bring that in. I think within 6 months we will understand what that looks like, and I'm hoping that we can offer a similar sort of service that we can to a victim of a spiking offence. So we are doing the basic work, but it has to be invested in. And I am making a very big bid to ministers around investing in VAWG, investing in this coordinated, learn the lessons from other offence types here, and let's get the infrastructure in place.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just follow up on that point, Sam, around a national guidelines and an infrastructure? As technology continues to grow, to develop, how are you going to ensure, is there a way of ensuring that the infrastructure keeps up with the changes in technology?
Well, it's a very interesting question, that, because I'll go straight to the comparator, that the epidemic nature of VAWG and the offending types that we see against women predominantly, it is not invested into the level it needs to be across policing. So again, we are making the argument that you need to take this as serious as organised criminality. Mm-hmm. You need to take it seriously as counter-terrorism, and you need to invest in it, and you need to help policing build the capability. So our plans at the moment say take all the learning that we've had for 3 years around a new operating model for rape and sexual offending, the activity around VAWG, all of our research capability that currently underpins a lot of our activity in the college, bring it together and allow it to have the strength and the leverage and the status that other crime types. And then we need to invest and put it on the same scale as counter-terrorism. That's the level we need to invest in. If we're going to really take this on and deal with the numbers and volume that you're talking about, and everything in our threat assessment will say this is only going to get bigger. And if it gets bigger, it gets more harmful. And if you sat with Jodie last night, the devastation that crime has had on her life. So anybody telling me that a victim online is not as serious as a victim of burglary or robbery, then I'd say, well, you need to come and meet Jodie, because the devastation is huge, and therefore we've got to put an infrastructure in place.
Thank you. Clare.
Yeah, could I just follow on about the police response? It's very good to hear that acknowledgement of the challenges that are facing the police. And I guess what I'd just like to add from working in the area around image-based abuse for so long is it so often falls between the gaps of different elements. So we do have a lot of learning we can take from Project Sateria, where the police are improving their investigations. And when I hear from like an organisation like Not Your Porn about the problems women have got reporting in this area, it's very similar to some of those problems. But we have also got at the moment the policing response to non-contact sexual offences, which I've been involved in drafting some of that guidance with the College of Policing, and some of these offences falls within that guidance and training, but not all of them. So there is a risk that we're going to have a national operating model for rape and serious sexual offences. We're going to have guidance and training for some non-contact sexual offences, and then we might have some effort around some of these image-based abuse offences. And it's just making sure that in relation to the image-based abuse offences, we do have the same sort of engagement that we've had with Project Sateria, with that academic and police building that knowledge and the survivor framework as well. So I guess I just wanted to make sure we're not always falling between the cracks.
Thank you. Catherine and then Rachel.
Thank you, and thank you to the witnesses for coming to us today. This is a question for you, Sam, as well, just to follow up on what David has already asked. I mean, we heard from witnesses yesterday in a private session how traumatising their experience was, I'm afraid, of reporting to the police. And, for example, we heard one person say they gave their account of what happened 3 hours to an officer. They then had to give it again a few days later to an officer, another whole 3 hours of going through the same experience, even though she had told someone already what had happened. Yeah. Another case of someone recording, giving evidence for 4 hours. The police lost the DVD, it was corrupted. She had to do it all over again. Yeah. And the other comment was, when both these witnesses went to the police, there was no compassion, there was no care at the door, there was no understanding immediately that they were a victim. So I guess my question is, one of the things that the victims felt would help them is that if they had a single police liaison officer to support them through the process. So can you talk about that, whether that would happen? At least one trained police officer at each station to be ready to take statements from victims who've experienced this kind of crime. So I'd just like your comments on that, please.
Yeah, it is, probably one of the most challenging areas. This, how do you get a capability across policing that's available 24/7, that we can keep as professionally alive to the trauma of whatever's going to walk in the door? And so police officers have to deal with such a range. How do we ensure that? And now some of it means that your basic curriculum has to be trauma-informed. So we're sending police officers out from day one with a capability and a knowledge. How do you keep that continuous personal development going? So we are looking at the curriculum of what a probationary police officer goes through. We're constantly trying to influence the College of Policing training. And that's why the coming together of a number of programmes is critically important, hosted by the college, so that we can be at the heart of where standard setting, guidance is all created. So there's a massive recognition that to get that trauma-informed approach on the front end of policing when a victim walks into a police station is our challenge, because it's across a range, but it's across a range of VAWG offending as well. So I'd completely agree, the ambition is there. It's how do we do it? Invariably, the officers that first meet a victim is not a specialist. So that first triage and understanding of what they've got is really quite generic. So again, it is our challenge, how to get them with the knowledge of the legislation, the mindset, the ability to be able to handle a victim in such difficult circumstances. They have walked in and have to tell that story. And that is our challenge.
Sorry, can I just interrupt there and push back a little bit?
Yes.
Because I don't think people should need necessarily training to just be polite and listen to somebody and make them feel, because this doesn't just go to how the process was, it was how they felt when they walked into a police station, which goes to the heart of a culture of a workplace and how they treat people that come into it. I understand that the only way to do this with current police officers is through training, but surely we should be having a police force that takes seriously anybody who walks into a police station and says, I've been a victim of a crime.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Would I want every police officer to be like that? Of course I would. Yeah. Is our training driven to achieve and deliver that? Of course it is. So it is about frontline supervisors, and it is about ensuring our police officers are fit to do their job they are, which is why 3 years down the line in a task force that was brought about because the utter devastation of confidence of women to trust police to take them seriously, we've been on that journey. I would say that we've made progress. I'm now 31 years service. It is a massively different place. But that doesn't mean we can't stop the search. Again, I go back to having had 3 years of hearing the testimonies of what a poor service officer in the front line is, then I am absolutely clear that unless you learn from what we've seen for 3 years and build on it and influence that culture, that's why part of our work streams are around influencing the culture, the language we use. There's a lot of criticism around victim-blaming language, And we will change that by changing our guidance, our toolkits, our behaviours, our leaders. So, we are driven. This is not just a single work stream. We are driven to move a culture on. And I'm a woman. I'm a representative of females in policing. So I want it to change, and I would want to think that anybody I know could walk in and at least have a polite, respectful service, of course.
Also, they need the message we're getting is they need one single person then who takes them through the process, who tells them when their court date is, who supports them, who is their police liaison officer. So is that on the horizon? Will victims of this crime get that?
I think that goes back to the response from policing at the moment is quite reactive. So I can't, Catherine, look at you and tell you that's available in every station because I don't believe it is. But that's why you need an operating model to say, what does a service against this crime type look like? And I think it's absolutely obvious, isn't it, that having a point of contact in a station for any police officer to go to get help, support, guidance and to support a victim is what you'd want. But you won't get that if you don't set your stall out to have an operating model. At the moment, we are reactive.
Thank you. Rachel.
Yeah, moving the subject on a little bit, and sorry, Sam, this one's also for you.
It's okay.
What's the process for taking down child sexual abuse material, and could that be applied to NCII content?
I'm not going to say I'm not a technological expert in this field. There is a process, like any police mandated powers. If we have the powers to do it, we have the liaison officers who will link in with the tech companies, and there will be probably an authority to go through to take it down. So I don't particularly worry about that. What I worry about is what the legislative framework power it gives us to do it. So that's my focus at the moment. Where we, I know as a senior officer that I carry plenty of authorities and powers. So once you've got a power, you can act on it. So we don't struggle to use powers, but taking down means you have to have a lawful requirement to be able to do so. And I think for me, having sort of got the overview of this crime type, one of the single biggest issues we have is that the actual image itself is not unlawful. And if you don't have a power, a bit like telephones, you can't seize them, you can't do anything with them if you don't have the powers. We have to act within the lawful requirements.
What you're saying is if those powers were there,
yeah,
the same process could be used to take down those images.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's not the issue.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Moving on then, this one's for Clare and Lorna. Thank you for coming along today. Do you think the law should be changed then to class NCII content as illegal in the same way as child sexual abuse material and terrorist content?
Do you want to? I guess I'd go about the question maybe in a different way, because I think what you're getting at is how do we manage to get this material removed from platforms, and particularly those platforms that are recalcitrant and refusing to do this. Now, if some of that material was treated in the same way as child sexual abuse material, we could put in place a process like with child sexual abuse material to get some of those websites blocked, for example. The overarching concern, though, I think I would have is that if all what would be great is to put in place a process like that. So you go through a criminal case, you get a conviction, and some of that material then goes through that process so that you can then get it removed and get it blocked from those websites. But if that's all we do, in a sense, we've then still got an awful lot of non-consensual intimate imagery that would be out there that's difficult to remove, because not everyone goes to report to the police, and not everyone, for example, gets a successful conviction. So I think what would be preferable is to have a system whereby anybody could get a court order to get material removed, for example, or a court order to block internet, to get the internet service providers to block particular websites. So in other words, it was accessible to everyone who had non-consensual intimate imagery of them shared without their consent, and not only those at the end of a criminal conviction process.
I'd just like to add a couple of points. There are some civil causes of action that a victim of NCII could use. I came up with 6 of them on Monday. I don't know if there's more. Data protection rules, defamation, misuse of private information, copyright. I've forgotten some of the others, but also I can never remember this one. It's an intent to harm. It's a tortious intent to hurt, and those would then allow somebody to use the tools that come through the High Court. So there could be a possibility for injunctions, and there could be a possibility for an order to remove and destroy material. The problem with that is it's going to be fact specific, so not everybody would fit within the confidentiality bucket, or not all the tools are available for data protection. It's also putting the onus on the victim, and going to the High Court is not cheap. And for the avoidance of doubt, I'd like to say that although the Online Safety Act contains an obligation for regulated user-to-user services to have an effective takedown system, it does not give users an individual right to go and say, take this particular item of content down. And the third point is it applies only to things falling within the definition of illegal content. There are 2 issues with that. One is the scope of the offences in the first place, whether they're adequate. And the second one is how we understand content or illegal content in the Act. And I thought there were 3 ways of understanding it. One is the broadest way, which is content of a type likely to be this sort of NCII. And that would fit with systems and processes and dealing with content in bulk. So if you're thinking, let's have a hash database and we can search those, then maybe that sort of tool. You could understand it as content that is related to a particular criminal offence, and then all subsequent reposting. So when it goes viral, that's the same sort of content. Or you could see it very, very narrowly as content that is related to a specific criminal offence, so that you could have an instance where content is posted once with the relevant mental element, so you get an offence, but then it is shared broadly by people who just aren't thinking, don't really care, and in that instance, it wouldn't be a criminal offence. So you have potentially a problem where a particular image is flitting in and out of the regulatory regime.
Can I just ask, you've talked about a number of civil processes, all of which appear to be costly and lengthy. How long does it take to get a court order, for example, to get an image taken down? I come back to my initial question. Do you think that NCII images should be classed as illegal in the same way as child sexual abuse material?
Well, I think they'd have to be classed as illegal after a process. And I guess that's what I'm saying. One process is if you go through a criminal case, you get a conviction, and then the court there, for example, could make such an order that material is then illegal, such that but you'd still need a process that then was able to, get the ISPs to block it. And that process doesn't really exist at the moment. Just like declaring it illegal, wouldn't actually do that. We need the process to put in place to treat NCII like the CSAM. What I was suggesting is what's happening in some other jurisdictions, for example, in some of the Canadian states. They've put in place swift, easy, online processes, like, it used to be called the small claims court, that we all go online if you've got a claim against your plumber or something. And they've put in place systems like that, so you could go online and get a very easy, straightforward, inexpensive court order to get material removed, to get the perpetrator to delete it, etc. So that's what I would put in place, so that you're avoiding this sort of existing civil law system that you need at least £10,000 and all the rest of it, and you need the time and the lawyers and what have you. So it's being done in other countries, and I think that's what I would be ideally recommending here.
What steps, if any, do you think we could take to block access to content that's hosted overseas?
Well, the Online Safety Act does provide some provisions relating to content that falls within the regime. Ofcom has a range of enforcement powers. They start with information notices telling a company that they've got it wrong, not doing the right thing. Would they care to sort of improve their performance? It then moves into the possibility of fines, and then we move to a section of powers called business disruption measures. And the first one of those is aimed at companies that provide services to the company hosting it. Ad providers, payment providers, things like that. And it allows Ofcom to go to court and tell those providers not to continue to provide the service. So you could disrupt the finances. The final possibility is a blocking order, but it's seen very much as a last resort, because if you think of a big general platform, the potential for inadvertent blocking of content that's perfectly benign or legal is high. So in a way, it will be easier to use those sorts of measures to tackle, I suppose, collector porn sites or something like that, rather than something like Facebook or Instagram, which have such a range of content on it. The Online Safety Act obviously only applies to services regulated by the Online Safety Act, so wouldn't be capable of being used, say, for BT or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, can I just, because that's what you've described is the very long-winded, lengthy, bureaucratic process that's exceptional. For example, you have to notify the Secretary of State in some of these contexts. So it's not designed for dealing with trying to get material removed from online. So, a different type of process is needed, because you've also got to deal with the fact that you might get it removed from one website, but the next day it appears on the next website. You don't want to have to go back to ground zero and start this lengthy process again. So it needs a bespoke process like CSAM.
If I can just follow up on what Claire said
very quickly.
Just to say that that blocking process isn't, again, designed for individual items of content. It is about when a company has, failed in its duties more generally. So, although you could use it, it's not ideal.
Just moving on to the last question. So, if NCI content were made illegal, like CSAM, could someone be prosecuted for possessing it, say, on their phone, despite not being aware that it was produced non-consensually?
It would depend how legislation around that was framed. I think that would all depend on the drafting. So it could be possible one could draft up a criminal offence such that in certain circumstances possessing it constituted a criminal offence. You could do that, and of course elements of that. If it was a form of extreme pornography, it is already a criminal offence to possess extreme pornography. So some would be covered, but it would depend on what drafting of a criminal offence there was.
Thank you. Clare, is it possible for us to write to you as a committee with a couple of follow-up questions on the idea of the small claims court? Because I think we'll have some questions around time and around the severity of that, and whether that's something that victims actually and survivors want as well.
It's definitely something that, that's being, yes.
That's okay.
That's being supported.
Thank you, Kira.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I want to talk a little bit more about the Online Safety Act. So under the Online Safety Act at the moment, are service providers obligated to remove all instances of NCII that have been uploaded? I mean, you sort of touched on this already, but...
Would you like the very short answer?
Yeah, absolutely.
No.
That's what I think.
Would you like me to explain that?
Yes, please, yeah.
So part of the reason is the nature of the duty. It's designed to operate at a general level. So as long as they've got a reasonable system in place for dealing with the problem in general terms, the fact that there might be some cases that slip through the net would probably mean that they are not in breach of their duty. It's sort of making best efforts, reasonable steps. It's not looking for perfection. The other reason is partly the definition of NCII as a crime and how broadly that's drafted, and particularly around mental elements. I touched on this when I said that I think Ofcom is saying that in each case an image is posted or shared, you've got to prove that a criminal offence is behind it, rather than saying this is content that has triggered the criminal law and that we will get all instances. So it seems possible to get the first posting, so you may be able to get it to come down, but you mightn't be able to make it stay down.
And that's a choice that Ofcom has made as to how to interpret the legislation. That's not in the Online Safety Act itself. No. So these are choices Ofcom's making about how to, in effect, limit what it's going to do.
That's really useful to know. I guess that you sort of, again, you touched on this already, but I guess I want to explore a little bit around consent. So we've talked a little bit about content that is uploaded that the user might not be aware was obtained without consent. So I guess I want to know if the Online Safety Act includes images that were uploaded where the user might not be aware that consent was given.
Do you mean in terms of a criminal offence, or do you mean in terms of platform liability?
I guess I mean in terms of platform liability.
Okay.
So it comes back to the scope of the criminal law. Yeah, so it's what the criminal law says about whether to satisfy the definition you need either an intention to harm, which I think is not...
No, I mean...
I'm saying that if you've got sort of a high mental element, then consent might or might not come into it. If you're making it a consent-based offence, then the question of consent will become important. And you then have questions of how does a platform infer consent, and is it, looking at each individual case, or does it get general rules about types of content, types of context, perhaps, can we look at the account that's spreading these sorts of things? Have they got a pattern? So it's a question of specificity there.
Sorry.
But Clare can talk more about the offence.
Before Clare comes in, can I just say we've got 20 minutes left and we have about 7 questions to get through. So could we please keep the answers as concise as possible? Okay. Thank you. And if there is anything that you want to add in terms of further detail, please, it's possible to write into us after the session. Thank you. Kirith.
Just in terms of the September announcement of NCI being made a priority offence, what difference does that make in terms of the Online Safety Act's sort of powers?
So that just updated the legislation. The Online Safety Act had already provided that the non-consensual sharing offence was a priority offence. So what this did was just update that so that it included the altered images and deepfakes. The priority offence itself was in the original Online Safety Act. It just means it now covers altered images like sexually explicit deepfakes.
Okay, so it's somewhat expanded on it slightly.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's tidied up that legislation so that it actually covers the deepfakes. Yeah,
that's great. And could you just tell us a little bit about how your proposed stay down amendment might work?
So, yeah. No, want to go?
No. So this is going to this question of how broadly or narrowly we understand illegal content, whether we're looking for a criminal offence in each case or whether we want to look at types of content. And I did wonder whether it would be possible to add an amendment to the Act to clarify that if an image was found to be illegal content, then it stays as illegal content even if it's shared on by people who didn't know that. And this is tackling the problem of something, an image being in the regime and then out of the regime. It's saying if it's the sort of thing that the regime should tackle, cross that threshold and stay there.
That's great. Thank you.
That's everything. Thank you. Alex.
Thank you, Claire. I'd like to ask you this if possible, please. We've talked a little bit about this already, but I want to ask about civil law legislation, and is there a requirement for that, for NCII, to improve both access to victims for redress, but also for support? And if so, what would that look like?
Yeah, I think it's about providing a comprehensive, holistic approach. So it's about providing comprehensive criminal law remedies, but it's also about adding to that the civil law context, because not everyone wants to report to the police, but also, as I said, there's additional orders that you would want, maybe to get the perpetrator to delete material, the perpetrator to remove it, to get the platform to delete material, and also a civil law. You could have a civil law statutory right. Like in the Protection of Harassment Act that you have for stalking, there's a civil offence there and a criminal offence, and you could have the same for intimate image abuse. So again, you could bring a case and you could get some compensation, for example. So it's about providing survivors with the range of options that might suit their particular needs, and giving as wide a possible range of options, really.
Alex, moving on to question 6, that's
okay. So, again, in written evidence, you've described Ofcom's powers as inadequate to respond to the needs of thousands of images across many websites to be removed. Can you explain why and how those inadequacies might be addressed?
Okay, in relation to Ofcom, I think I'd make 2 general points. The first one, as we've gone into, in relation to, for example, blocking recalcitrant websites that won't remove NCII. The powers in the Online Safety Act given to Ofcom are not designed to deal with those individual pieces of items, so they simply don't work. The second thing I would say about Ofcom is it doesn't also have individual powers to deal with things like, in comparison to, say, the Australian E-Safety Commissioner, who can bring cases on behalf of individuals, who can contact platforms on behalf of individuals. They have much more greater powers to actually interact with the individuals and take action, for example, on their behalf. And I think in this space that would be really useful. So, for example, you could have an E-Safety Commissioner who was the body responsible for perhaps blocking those websites that aren't taking the material down. You know, that's what you could put into place for, you know, you could, I wouldn't necessarily add those powers to Ofcom because they've got so many powers already, but if, for example, one established an e-safety commissioner or an online safety commission, you could have that body having such powers to deal with individuals as well.
Thank you. David.
Yes, Sam, another question for you, if I may. So we're aware of cases in which people who've been convicted of intimate image abuse have had their devices returned to them by the police, but with the NCII content still on them. So do you know why this is happening, and do we need new powers to stop this from happening, to ensure the content's destroyed?
So, again, being brief, yes. It's happening because we don't have the powers to stop that property getting back into the hands of the perpetrator. We have to operate within the realms of the law. So that's why I would say anything that pushes the opportunity to make NCII illegal is going to help. So it's about power and requirement. So police will seize, retain, destroy if they're given the powers to do it.
Thank you. What do confiscation orders role play in that at all, and is there a role for that to play?
Confiscation orders are quite a protracted process to go through, and the legislation on which they're based comes from other remits. So there's something about due process. So again, I'm a big believer in, if you've got a piece of legislation, use it. So I would always use legislation that can pull in. But there's something about, you know, that is a financial, I would say, more sort of power and process that policing often goes down. Is that really where we've got to grapple for a piece of legislation to do something as simple as keep a device with images off the perpetrator? And that would be, you know, let's, you know, enhance the legislation and get the right powers rather than seek to pull across, because invariably it's probably going to get complex and it will be challenged, and then we'll have stated cases, and it just makes it more problematic. So for me, if this legislation is not doing what it needs to do in the basic format of protecting a victim, like retaining a phone and a device because it has images on, then we need the powers.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to culturally intimate images. Sam, I'm going to start with you. I guess I know what the answer might be, but if you could elaborate, please. Are the police sufficiently trained and equipped to support victims of NCII where the image is culturally intimate?
So I think this is a massive challenge for us. And I will look to my colleagues if they please put me right if I do miss it, but I just don't think the Online Safety Act gave us the opportunity. It hasn't gone far enough to be sensitive to that. So there's something about a generic piece of legislation then is trying to apply it across some really difficult, complex areas. So that's not a good starting point. We have no guidance. You know, and that's a fundamental gap for us. So we've got to generate it. We've got to work on it. I go back to, we have to invest in this area of business. We cannot leave these as gaps. We have to know what the response is to a victim. And this is all about the victim and the harm, you know, and the policing response has to meet that. And if the guidance isn't there, then I will struggle to be able to justify how a police officer is able to do it. So policing has to get itself fit for purpose and operate in a sensitively cultural way. You know, in this area, it's absolutely a requirement. So yes, it's inadequate.
Claire, do you think the Online Safety Act is strong enough in this regard?
So it's, I guess, based in the criminal law, because the criminal law around intimate image abuse, the definitions of what constitutes an intimate image abuse are based on, you know, sexual, nude, partially nude, and toileting. So they don't cover the criminal law does not cover that range of culturally intimate images that I think you're talking about. This is an issue that has been raised many times over the years. The Law Commission, when it did look at it a couple of years ago, said basically the law would be too vague to extend what constitutes an intimate image to a range of these sorts of images you're talking about. But it is something that's raised by a range of organisations working with individuals. It is more complicated, though, to draft up such a provision. just because, exactly what would be intimate in different contexts varies. But there are different ways of doing it. Of course, in the Criminal Justice Bill in April, there was an amendment put forward by the now Minister to deal with some of these issues. And there is an example in Australia. So in the Australian context, there is a civil law provision around culturally intimate images. So we could, my colleagues and I have said for a number of years, we could at least be adopting what's already happened in the Australian context. It does only apply in one context around the attire, the expected attire of an individual. So it doesn't cover the range, but it would be somewhere to start, I think, in terms of dealing with those images.
Can I just say, as a corollary, if it doesn't fall within the criminal law, then the regulatory regime won't bite. The only possible way you might catch it within the regulatory regime is if you're talking about content harmful for children in some way. And I'm not even sure about that.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to synthetic NCII or deepfakes. Clare, what legislative steps do you think are needed to tackle the proliferation of deepfake imagery and nudification?
So we have had the recent change whereby it's now a criminal offence to share sexually explicit deepfakes without consent. I think the next step that's needed is to criminalise their creation. The previous government last April did announce that it was going to introduce such legislation. And the current government has said that it plans to do so. What I hope we see from that legislation is that it's comprehensive, because the previous version, for example, had a limited definition of intimate image, such that, for example, if you produced a sexually explicit deepfake and you had pixelations over the nipples, it wouldn't have constituted the intimate image. So obviously that needs to be changed. I think we just need the same definition of intimate image as we use currently. And also the previous government proposal would have limited it to only certain motivations being proven. So it would only have been a criminal offence to create it if you could prove certain motivations. And the risk there was you would easily have had defences of saying it was, my artistic expression and or I was doing it for humour. So I'm hoping we'll have a comprehensive approach. There is a version of that in Baroness Owen's private members bill at the moment in the House of Lords to criminalise creation. It is a comprehensive approach that's adopted there. It must also include solicitation of sexually explicit deepfakes, which, as you're aware from a situation like Jodie, that was what happened in her case. And we know that that's how perpetrators work online in large communities. They're taking and trading and sharing and asking others to make these images. So we need to ensure it covers solicitation as well.
Do you think that the platforms that host synthetic NCII should be held accountable?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And of course, there's then a role for, Ofcom, for example, that could be taking greater action against them. But of course, the platforms themselves that are hosting the material absolutely should be held accountable. But we absolutely need to hold accountable the platforms that, for example, are facilitating the search. So, I know you spoke to Microsoft and Google, but for example, even just the other night, when you type in deep fake into Bing, it auto completes porn, so deep fake porn. And although if you type deep fake porn into Google, it doesn't now bring it up. If you put deep fake porn into Google with the images, it brings it all up. So the changes they make are half-hearted. And need to actually be properly comprehensive to try and reduce the rise of this material.
Thank you. Natalie.
Thank you. So this is a question for Sam. Do police officers receive any specialist training on responding to victims of synthetic or deepfake NCII? And if not, would you support such training being offered?
Natalie, I think the fact that a victim can walk into a police station and want to report it means that our frontline capability must be trained in it. It is about prioritising it, and again, this is why I go to the nature of NCII has to, I think, be enhanced and come alongside CSAM so that it can fight for a place the frontline training of officers. So yes, there is a place for it. It's needed. They will have to interface, and we talked, haven't we, initially about what does that look like. Of course, they need the knowledge, and we will push that as a requirement as we develop the policing capability that needs to wrap itself around this.
Thank you very much, and we will be writing to you, Clare, about those follow-up questions. Thank you all for your time. I'm very grateful and for your experience and sharing that today. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Welcome to the Women and Equalities Select Committee. We have in front of us Jess Phillips, the Minister for Safeguarding and VAWG at the Home Office, and Alex Davies-Jones, the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for the Ministry of Justice. Welcome to you, and thank you very much for coming. I'm going to hand straight over to Rachel.
Thank you very much, Ministers, for attending this afternoon. And Minister Phillips, would you prefer I called you Jess? Jess, thank you. Much easier for me as well. I know that you were here for the whole of the previous session, so some of the questions may appear to be a little bit repetitive. So apologies for that. But victims of NCII who report to the police are 4 times as likely to report a negative experience than a positive one. Yeah. Why do you think that's the case, and what are you doing to improve the police response?
Look, I wish that I could say that I was surprised by that particular statistic, but I'm not particularly surprised. I'm afraid to say that you would find similar readouts across the entire violence against women and girls space. However, I would say it's probably more acute in this particular area for the sole reason that, how long has the internet been around? Quite some time. But, it is something that officers aren't necessarily, it's not your sort of classic crime. And so a not great response is, to be honest, I have to say, not a surprise. As somebody who has been a victim of this crime myself. So what we are doing, Sam gave very, very good account of exactly what needs to be done and the infrastructure that will be needed for that to happen. That is frameworks around violence against women and girls training more broadly. That is about standards in response. It is about what we monitor from police forces, about how they are performing in a variety of cases of violence against women and girls, and all of that is part of the Home Office's work, as we've now 16 weeks we've been in. is looking at exactly what those standards monitoring systems are to improve the experience for people coming at, not just the experience, but also the charging then thereafter of victims coming forward about violence against women and girls. And so that will be bespoke training on various different things. It was in the manifesto that we would improve police training, and that will be the case. And I think as you say, I was here for the previous session, to the point about having specialist officers, you have to, in my view, and certainly what I will be striving for across the piece, is you have to have universal levels of knowledge in all police officers at the same time as having specialisms within police officers that are properly resourced.
Okay, and I think you'll sort of preempt the next question about images that remain online, so content that remains online because the police have asked for it to be kept there to aid their investigation, is the worst possible outcome for victims.
Absolutely.
Because for each second that's there, more people see it and more harm is created. So do you think that police officers are being adequately trained on the specific need for material to be removed? And is there something you think the department could do straight away on that area?
Clearly not. If I think you've taken evidence on this committee that has happened, that police officers have been told, there has been guidance created, I think it was in May 2024, specifically around what is meant to happen in these cases. But guidance is only as good as the people who know it exists. And so, yes, of course. And police training and creating a proper programme of police training. I believe that the College of Policing has created an e-learning package. Yes. Is that correct? An e-learning package specifically on this subject. But it is how we make sure, and what the government has to do, you see, because I can't tell police forces, I can't at the moment say to the 43 different forces, you have to do this by the 20th of June next year. I literally don't have those powers. What we have to come up with in our department is a regime that monitors to see what is happening. But I think Sam covered it pretty well, is that there needs to be more training, it needs to reach everybody, and the guidance needs to be clearer. And that is the responsibility of both the NPCC and the college, who we work with. I mean, I don't think Sam would mind me saying, there isn't a day goes by where I don't see Sam. This is, I think, the second meeting I've been in with her today. So we work incredibly closely to the same aim, but it is going to take time.
Thank you, and I know this is a difficult area for you, so I appreciate your evidence. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister, just to follow up, you said about improvements. How are you measuring and monitoring those improvements? What standards are you putting in place? And when are we likely to see some improvements?
Well, that is $1 million question. I wish I could say it would happen overnight.
I know, but is there an expectation?
So the Home Secretary has announced a regime of the improvements to police standards, that we are expecting massive improvements in both police culture and attitudes towards victims of these offences, that specifically eradicates victim blaming. And last month it was announced that measures such as, for the first time, proper vetting will be in place, and those standards would be put on a statutory footing. Now we are expecting to legislate for exactly what that is in the next in this parliamentary session. Soon is as all things happen in this place. It never happens when you thought it was going to happen. Any bill that ever came forward on the day it was meant to. I've never known one. Some of you might not have experienced this yet, but that happens. So the truth is, though, is that it's going to develop. We will be creating the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, which will definitely include this as part of it. That will be published in springtime. Again, another thing that in government changes. But I can't sit here and say to you the thing I'm going to monitor is this, because it might turn out that the thing I need to monitor is something completely different. And how many cases come forward on various different things and how the Ofcom regime works. So at the moment we are all waiting on exactly what the regulators' standards are going to be, whether it works, whether it's interacting with the criminal law in just exactly the way that you have just been hearing about. And we won't really know those things in lots of cases until at least the middle of next year. So how exactly you monitor what is happening in this space at the moment is unknown. But it will be included in the violence against women and girls work and in the standards for policing work.
Thank you. David.
Thank you, and thank you both for coming. Minister Davies-Jones, to you, if I may. So we're aware of cases where people who have been convicted of intimate image abuse have had the devices returned to them with those images still on the device. So why is that happening, and what steps are you going to take to prevent that from happening?
Thank you, David. Thank you for your question. Apologies I couldn't make the earlier session. I had to be in the chamber on the front bench. But thank you for all the work that the committee is doing on this. It's a really vital area. On that point that you've just made, so we are aware of cases where this has happened. Is a difficult area. The courts do have the power under certain sections of the Sentencing Act to seize these articles, to seize these devices for the purposes of or for facilitating the commission of the criminal offence and these properties. That can be done. Problem we've got is around the data and statistics on how often this is happening. It's something that's really tricky to capture, it's really tricky to obtain, and therefore the current Sentencing Council is looking at this to see whether or not more work needs to be done in this area. They are reviewing it to keep it under review, and I'm sure the views of this committee will be taken into consideration there too.
I guess if I may just follow up on that, but do you agree that at the very least the law should dictate that those images should be removed from the device before it's returned in every situation, in every occurrence?
Well, these images shouldn't be there. I think that's very, very clear. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
That currently isn't the case. How are we going to ensure that they will be removed?
It's about working with the judiciary to ensure that they are operating the sentencing guidelines that they currently have. We do need to respect that the judiciary are independent and they are following the sentencing guidelines that they have been given. As I said, the Sentencing Council are looking at this. We are looking at this as a department, and we will work with the judiciary to make sure that the views expressed here are given fed back as well.
Thank you very much. Just moving on to technology and hashing, from both. We've heard from Revenge Porn Helpline about the valuable role of hashing technology and how much that plays in preventing harmful content from being uploaded. Should Ofcom make accepting hashing technology a requirement for major platforms that operate in the UK? And my second point on technology was we heard from survivors yesterday, and they talked about the lack of facial recognition technology that's not being used currently by the police, and the outdated technology that the police are using, and whether there is anything in plan to improve the technology being used by police. So
specifically on the hashing, I mean, from our perspective, there is absolutely no reason why the same hashing technology that is used, and I'm the minister who leads also for child sexual abuse imagery, where it is clear that the use of it is far more widespread in that, and also a part of Ofcom's requirements. I see no good reason why the same technology could not be used, but it will be for Ofcom to determine, following the consultation on the guidance that I think it's in February 2025, they will be consulting on the violence against women and girls guidance, which of course myself and my officials take a huge amount of time to be part of, especially as well with our interest in child sexual abuse imagery prevention. But I have to say, I see no reason why, and the technology that has been created by the Revenge Porn Helpline, I mean, it's just nowhere near as widely used as you would. I think it's 10 companies currently agreeing to it. So I suppose while I'm here in a public platform, the rest could crack on.
That's what we've heard from other witnesses. Is there anything you wanted to add on the hashing? Or No.
I totally agree.
Totally agree. Excellent. Okay, thank you. Alex.
Thank you. This is for Minister Davies-Jones. May I call you Alex?
Yes, please do, Alex.
Fabulous. So we've repeatedly heard that NCII content itself needs to be made illegal in the same way as child sexual abuse imagery. Microsoft has told us that this would unlock faster action. Will you commit to making NCII content illegal?
We've committed to making an offence of creating a deep fake illegal, and we will be legislating for that this session. There are a number of offences already sort of in the realm of this space in terms of what is illegal. There's a number of offences on voyeurism, on threat to share, on sharing, etc. So there are a number of offences already in the realm of this. We're currently looking at whether there are gaps and whether they need to be closed, and we are looking at that quite carefully.
Okay. So can you expand a bit on that context, because what we've heard very strongly is that this is a gap, and I think that's come from both victims and industry. So how will you be looking at that, and how will what's the time frame for looking at those gaps and when they will be filled?
So we're looking at that very closely, and that gaps related to deepfake specifically is something we're committed to doing this session.
Yep.
If there is a non-consensual intimate image that is uploaded, that is illegal. We've made that illegal now. It's priority content. The platforms will have to check to remove this. Ofcom's codes of practice will be published next month, and the Act will be implemented next year. So all of those offences do exist in terms of making that image illegal, and therefore it should be having to be removed by the platforms, and that image is illegal. There are gaps related to deepfakes, which we are legislating for.
Okay, thank you.
In previous panels, Google told us that it just downlists it because it is not illegal, and so don't treat it the same as CSAM. Can you see how there might be a difference in how compliant companies and platforms would be if this content was made illegal, just point blank?
So it is illegal. I think we need to be clear here that non-consensual intimate imagery that is uploaded is illegal. The gaps currently exist around the deep fake creation, which we are legislating for this session. Part of the problem is that we've registered it now as priority content, for which Ofcom will have to do their codes of practice next month, and then the platforms will be compelled to take action against this material. I think that's what we're all waiting for, and I appreciate it's frustrating and it's slow, but they're an independent regulator. They have to go through the motions of going through their codes of practice, implementing the Act, etc., and then the platforms will have to act as if it were CSAM to remove this content.
So if a company such as Google wasn't taking off this material from their search engines and was just downlisting it, they would be still promoting illegal content.
Ofcom would be able to take action against them and the powers that they have. So it would be £18 million fine them 18 million or 10% of their global revenue.
Me and Alex fantasise about what we might spend some of this £18 million on.
Perhaps funding revenge porn helpline. But I think, sorry, Catherine.
I just wanted to clarify, because as I understand it, at the moment it's the sharing of it that's illegal, not the creation of it, and that's the loophole
that we're closing.
So the loophole needs to be, we need to make any content illegal in the Online Safety Act. And is that what you're saying?
That's not the loophole. So the loophole is around the creation of the image, and that is the loophole that we're closing. Currently, sharing that image without consent is illegal.
But making it isn't. Okay.
Yes, and that's what we're closing.
And we know that a large amount of this content is created and hosted overseas.
Yes.
Should that be blocked as well?
If we make a criminal offence in this country for the creation of that deepfake, then yes.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you. And thank you, Ministers, for coming before the panel and for all the great work you've both done over the years on the topic of violence against women. So this is a question for you, Alex. What difference does the September announcement of non-consensual intimate image abuse being a priority offence make?
So it means, as we've already heard, that the platforms will have to actively make sure that this content isn't proliferating on their platforms and take action against that to remove it. When they are made aware of it, they have to take action to remove this imagery, otherwise they are falling foul of the Online Safety Act and therefore are liable for Ofcom's powers to take action.
Okay. They will have to take it down. Will you consider a stay-down amendment to the Online Safety Act so that once an item of the content is removed, then all further cases where it's uploaded will also automatically need to be removed without further moderation.
So this is something that DCIT are looking at, and we're awaiting the codes of practice that are published by Ofcom next month. I appreciate it's frustrating that we haven't got them now, but we await to see what's in those codes of practice and then the implementation of the Act, and that could be something that is in the Act. I know there are organisations, I know the department is fed in terms of what it wants to see in those codes of practice from Ofcom, and we just have to wait and see what's in them next month.
Thank you. Oh, I've got another question, sorry.
Recommendations.
Pardon?
You could make them some strong recommendations.
Yes, we could. We should, as a committee. I'm sure we will. Will the government consider implementing new civil law legislation for a statutory regime on NCII to improve victims' access to redress and support?
So there are already a wide range of civil actions which can be taken against those who are perpetrating intimate image abuse, including actions for defamation and harassment, that victims and survivors are able to get that redress directly from the perpetrator.
Right.
Thank you.
Can I ask a quick? Yeah, we've heard instances of one group of victims being offered like £100 each. Do you think that's a sufficient redress?
I can't comment on individual cases. The whole point is that they are done by the judiciary. If it's civil law, it's done by the civil case. If it's done through another means, it's independent. But I think what I would say is that what we need to make victims and survivors more aware of are their rights under the Victims Code, and that's something that sits squarely within my remit. It's something that this government is taking very seriously in terms of promoting the code, refreshing the code. We're consulting on the Victims Code early next year, and it is, on all of us to ensure that victims and survivors know their rights under this code, that they are eligible to get compensation.
Thank you. Alex.
Thank you. Alex, to you again. Professors McGlynn and Woods have labelled Ofcom as wholly inadequate when it comes to dealing with individual victims of NCII. The Revenge Porn Helpline agrees with this, unsurprisingly. Should there be a separate body specifically for enforcing the removal of NCII?
I'm aware of the evidence that you've heard and people's feedback on Ofcom. I think Ofcom, again, are in a unique position here where they have yet to publish their codes of practice. A lot of this has yet to be implemented. It's a lot of ifs, buts, maybes on how this act will work. And my lovely colleague in the Home Office sat next to me likes to use a phrase called "we have to suck it and see." I said it so you didn't have to, around a lot of this, which again is incredibly frustrating, and we have to wait. But what I would say is that we are not just sitting back in terms of waiting for this. The legislation is one aspect of what we're doing. There's a whole stream of work going on around this work across government on tackling violence against women and girls, on tech abuse, on intimate image abuse more widely, and how we can support victims and survivors. And it's not just going to be legislation that fixes this, but on Ofcom, we have to wait and see in terms of their codes of practice under the existing legislation, and if that isn't strong enough, if it isn't acting as government intends, then we won't hesitate to take action.
I think that, like, for lots of us, the frustration that you will hear from us is I suppose partially as well, because we want this to happen as quickly and as well, and for the regime to be very bold, and in fact to give Alex some credit here. She spent years of her life fighting for stuff to go into the online safety bill. We are in a situation. It took a long time. It took a long time to get to where we got to. However satisfactory we may think this is or not. But we're on the precipice of finding out whether these fears are real and what needs changing. What I wouldn't say is that the government wouldn't ever rule out further changes, but at the moment it's a sort of timing issue of let's wait and see what we get from the years and years and years of work this building put into that particular act, and then see what might need change.
Thank you. Given that this is a crime that is happening now and increasing with alarming frequency, how long are we going to wait to see whether these changes embed in the way that we want them to?
Very good question, and one we are having close discussions within our colleagues within DSIT about and how we take action. But we're not just, like I said in my previous answer, we're not just waiting for this legislation to become implemented, to take action. There's a whole ream of work that's going on that underpins all of this to tackle violence against women and girls, to support victims and survivors that we are doing. Just in the MOJ, we are, as I've said, consulting on the Victims Code. Is that fit for purpose? And we are consulting on that early next year. I know there's a gap in terms of how we support those who are victims of online abuse and tech abuse. So I would encourage the committee to feed into that consultation when it goes live next year. We will be legislating to expand the powers of the Victims Commissioner. That's just some of we're closing the legislative gaps, but then there's also reams of work going on with education, Department for Health, DWP, cross-government to try and support victims and survivors in this area.
Yeah, I would say that you're like, if we thought that a regulator and or the Online Safety Act was the absolute panacea, we'd all just sit back. But the work that has to be done. I mean, actually, the policing response to this has absolutely nothing to do with the Online Safety Act. Looking at ways in which we are improving policing around all violence against women and girls crimes, of which this absolutely. I mean, it doesn't even just. I mean, tech abuse and intimate images. I've rarely known somebody be exploited in all my years of working with victims of exploitation, where they didn't start with an image, an intimate image. So how we have to improve the policing response across the board, and making sure that intimate image abuse isn't just seen as now, like, back in the day when people used to say just a domestic, it has been a bit like, oh, it's just kids sending naked nudes around. Stamping that out within, whether that's policing, within the courts, within the victims' services, and making sure that they're there. That can all go on now. That is all going on now.
Thank you. And just because they were mentioned, I should say that DSIT were invited to come today, but we will be writing to them with any follow-up questions that we have. David.
Thank you. Alex, another one for you. So we talked briefly about compensation, and just to expand a little bit on what Catherine mentioned before, one of the survivors that we've heard from told us that the courts awarded her and 14 victims of NCII abuse £100 each from the abuser. Now, it'd be I know you can't comment on individual cases, but it'd be interesting to see whether you think that was sufficient. And as far as we're aware, the Criminal Injuries Compensation Scheme does not apply to victims of online abuse. So can you commit to including this type of abuse within the scope of the scheme?
Yeah, so on the first point, I can't comment. It is for the court to award appointments. I mean, I would argue that there is no amount of money that's going to fix this, and money isn't the only answer in terms of support that's available to victims and survivors either. The Home Office funds the helpline, the Ministry of Justice funds a number of support services across the country to support victims and survivors who have been victims of these crimes. So there's a range of support available for victims and survivors. On KICA, so on the Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority, now that's not true, because I am aware of victims and survivors who have had redress through this scheme. The scheme isn't set up for specific offences. The scheme is set up for what has happened to you as a result of a violent crime. Now, one of the awards that can be made is as a result of disabling mental injury. Now, if you have a case that is brought forward to the independent body, then they will award on a case-by-case basis. And I am aware of victims and survivors who have had redress through this scheme. Now, part of the problem we've got is the scheme is massively oversubscribed, as you can imagine. It is set up with the core purpose to provide compensation to eligible victims who are injured as a direct result of violent crime. And we are, as you are all aware, in a very, very difficult financial situation and an environment. And I wish that I had a pot of money that could provide compensation to all victims of crime, but that simply isn't the case, which is why the scheme is set up with its core aims and purpose. But I am aware of victims and survivors who are eligible to claim compensation. And again, it goes back to, if victims and survivors don't know that, then we need to be making them aware of the Victims Code, which explicitly sets out what they are eligible for under that code, and increase awareness of it so that they're able to claim.
If I just make a quick comment. Thank you very much for that response, and good to get some clarity. You both know this from your personal experiences, but, these victims are... We met some victims recently, and the mental impact that this abuse has had on them, it's almost like non-physical rape. quite frankly, and I know that's quite a harsh way to put it. So, you know, we need to keep that in mind. It might not be physical violence, but it's absolutely mental violence that these people undergo. Yeah.
It's a disabling mental injury, which is what the scheme covers.
100%. Thank you.
It absolutely is.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to this issue, because we've heard from survivors who have said that they would greatly benefit from things like counselling or therapy support, and in the case of sort of £100 conversation, that wouldn't even really cover 2 sessions. And I guess that's just something I just wanted to put on record, is that there is an explicit need for that as a very core, important form of support for survivors of this sort of abuse.
I totally agree, and that's why I made the point around that financial redress is just one element of victim support that is available to them. You know, the MOJ funds a ream of support services for tackling violence against women and girls to support victims and survivors across the country, whether that's, you know, therapeutic support with grants directly to police and crime commissioners, so they're able to fund services in their area for whatever they see fit. And the Victims and Prisoners Act, now that it's implemented, has this duty. Once implemented, will have a duty to collaborate, so we'll go even further, so that police and crime commissioners are able to commission services in their area directly to support their communities, so that they can get that support.
Thank you. Rachel.
Yeah, if someone wakes up to their intimate images being available on a porn website, what would you advise them to do?
Oh gosh, I would advise them to phone the police in terms of reporting the crime, and hopefully that they would get once we've got to grips with it, a really good response from the police, and they would know what to take action in terms of how to deal with this. But there's also the Revenge Porn Helpline, which I hate the name of, but the Home Office funds to get them support and to help them get that material taken down. They have a circa 90% success rate, is it?
Yeah,
in terms of getting that material taken down. And so that is absolutely what I would advise them to do.
But if it's from a non-compliant website and the Revenge Porn Helpline hasn't been able to help them get that taken down, what would you suggest they did?
If it's from a non-compliant website, but sadly it's horrendous, and I would ask them to seek out victim support, go to somebody to get that support. The problem we've got is that until the Online Safety Act is implemented, there is no way of getting that material taken down.
Thank you. It's been mentioned already, the Revenge Porn Helpline. Its caseload in the last 4 years has increased tenfold, from 1,600 to 19,000 cases. Will the government commit, its funding's up in March, I think you know what question I'm going to ask, will you be committing to ensure that their funding is renewed?
I mean, first and foremost, I just want to say what amazing work they do, and having personally helped me as well, have some of the images of me taken down, I feel completely and utterly indebted to them, although that will not form part of my decision making. But I'll just declare that interest. But look, the budget setting process that has just gone on here in this building with the Chancellor then comes back to us in the Home Office, and we now are sort of undertaking the line by line efforts of what needs to be funded. But all I would say is the government have declared violence against women and girls as a national emergency, and it is one of the missions for government. So, funnily enough, whilst currently the Home Office absolutely does fund the Revenge Porn Helpline, and Alex's department in the Ministry of Justice funds victim support that goes out in local communities, that we very much feel that in a proper violence against women and girls strategy, we need to be making sure that across the system, every bit of commissioning is taking account of violence against women and girls. So health commissioning, education commissioning. So it shouldn't just be pots of money that get given out from the Home Office and the Ministry of Justice. This has to be a wholesale government effort, and that is what we are working towards. But unfortunately, I can't say at the moment exactly what our budget alliances will be for next year.
Well, Catherine?
Yeah, one of the earlier witnesses talked about an online safety commissioner. Do you both think we should have one of them? Using the example of Australia.
Yeah.
So that the victims can get in touch with them.
Yeah, well, we've got the Victims Commissioner. We have got the Domestic Abuse Commissioner. There are a number of commissioners where victims and survivors can go to get support already, and I feel like we wouldn't want to be diluting their roles and their voice and their core purpose. We've already committed to expanding the role of the Victims Commissioner in primary legislation in this session. I feel like, if appropriate, if we feel like there's a gap, then of course we wouldn't hesitate to act. But we will also raise this with the existing commissioners to see what more we can do to support victims and survivors of this abuse.
And on any guidance that Ofcom produce about violence against women and girls, the statute states they have to speak to both the Victims Commissioner and the Domestic Abuse Commissioner. But, you know, making those commissioners ensure that they have teeth over any process that they are part of is something that we are constantly have as an issue on our agenda.
I just think that is such a huge amount of these images, and it's such a huge area of online abuse that it may be that's what's needed.
Yeah, a specific one. I mean, again, we go back to the suck it and see. We have to, you know, you're right. The trouble with all violence against women and girls crimes, actually, the problem with all of them is volume. Actually trying to tackle really serious, high-level volume crimes is not something that... So if I put it back to you and say, even if I said, yes, let's have a person for that, is one enough? So actually, I think the regime that has been set out is one that we have to see how it goes. But as Alex and I have said, and as part of the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy and the missions, we will be keeping a watching brief on whether it's working and proposing changes if it doesn't.
Thank you. We know the Chancellor had set out in the budget very strict, strict measures on the budget and how we spend taxpayers' money. So will the government consider ring-fencing a proportion of the fines that's been levied against tech companies by Ofcom to fund the provision of support services for victims of online abuse at all?
My understanding that if the fines are issued by Ofcom, once the Act is implemented next year, that money will come back to government.
Okay.
So that is my understanding.
I suppose it's for us to then talk to that. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so it will come back to government and it's yet to be determined how that would be spent or allocated. Okay, thank you. Natalie.
Thank you. So, Alex, you recently said that you were considering what further legislative measures were needed to ban sexual deepfakes and nudification apps.
Yes.
What measures are you considering?
Range of them in terms of how do we create the best effective law, what is going to work in this field. So it's nothing's off the table in terms of what we're currently considering on how best to proceed in terms of creating these new offences and taking action in this space. So keen to hear the recommendations from this committee.
Thank you. Should victims of synthetic NCII be able to claim damages from the relevant deepfake creator platforms and host websites?
So we've already talked about redress in terms of civil action that can be taken, etc., from perpetrators directly. That is there. I know one of the things that's been considered is should victims and survivors be able to take redress from the platforms directly. Again, something that should be potentially considered.
Thank you. And should they also be able to claim damages from search engines that produce the results for those websites and platforms?
This is something we debated really, really heavily during the creation of the Online Safety Act. So I was the opposition shadow minister leading for the Labour Party in opposition on the bill, and we went about this quite around the houses on how does one access compensation, how does one get that redress. We currently have the Ofcom range of powers that we've inherited from the previous government. They are producing their codes of practice. They have the powers to issue the fines. I think we have to kind of wait and see. But as we've said, nothing's off the table in terms of what could be looked at.
Thank you. So the government committed to strengthening police training on violence against women and girls. Can you provide more detail on what this will mean in practice for deepfake NCII specifically?
I mean, like exactly what it needs to be for deepfake and NCII the government doesn't write the police training. It is written usually in concert with experts, and in fact I think that they're working with some of the experts that you've had in front of you today. The College of Policing work with people like those who run the revenge porn helpline and others to create the content that might be needed. So it's not for the government doesn't invent the police training. The role that the government has is we can oversee that process and monitor whether we think it is good enough and give advice and guidance on that. But then what we can do is monitor whether police forces are undertaking that training. So, it was a constant bugbear of mine that, not every force in the country was trained in domestic abuse, which is unacceptable and not something that the new government would tolerate. So exactly what the training regime is going to be in the future and what will be in it is up to the College of Policing, but the government will be keeping an incredibly close eye and using whatever power it has to insist that it is everywhere.
Thank you. So finally, Microsoft have asked that funding be made available for police training and judicial education specific to deepfake NCII harm. Will the government make that funding available?
Microsoft asked for funding.
Look, the government, the announcements around funding, including police funding settlements, will be coming out in due course. I have to say that the regime in the past with regard to police funding for specific training, I go back to the example of domestic abuse, is that actually the Home Office has funded forces where they haven't done it. And I have to say, I think that is unacceptable. We won't change the culture of violence against women and girls in any of the institutions that we want to be better, whether that's when we first go forward to the police, whether it's in our courts, or whether it's when you go to the doctor and talk to them about your mental health needs because of what has happened to you. We won't make that better by central government departments just giving out pots of money on schemes that we wish to see happen. You might have to do that to get these things to happen, but these things have to become core. The volume of this crime, the pain that you have seen from the victims that you have spoken to, the data you have been given by experts, tells me that this should become standard day-to-day police work. And therefore, it's very likely that the Home Office works to help develop the training, funds specific pilots on things to see if things work. But I have to, what I would say, push back to Microsoft, who are very welcome to fund it should they want to. It's the responsibility of police forces around the country to make sure that their police officers are trained properly and have that updated appropriately.
Thank you. Curious.
Thank you. Alex, you mentioned previously gaps in protection for victims in current legislation around intimate image abuse. I wanted to ask if those gaps include non-sexual but culturally sensitive images, for example, women being pictured without headscarves.
Well, this is a really complex area. And I know it's been discussed in previous legislation, previous bills that were brought forward in this House. And I think we need to be very clear that what counts as intimate to one person is very, very different to someone else. And it can also be different between communities and different groups. The Law Commission have already looked at this, and they concluded that it would be impossible to craft a definition that suits everyone and therefore could result in over-criminalisation. But what I would say is that where these images are then uploaded, they could be caught under existing offences, such as blackmail or harassment, for example. But we are keeping this area of law under review and will not hesitate to act if there are gaps.
I guess just on that, how does the government intend to legislate against this type of abuse? I mean, obviously you've outlined some of the challenges with it, but is there any way that we could legislate against it outside of sort of existing parameters?
So the Law Commission have already looked at this. They've concluded that it wouldn't be possible to do so. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean you can't, but we respect the Law Commission and their independence in looking at this quite closely. And I think it's also important to note that these non-consensual images don't necessarily need to be sexual in nature as well. So the images that are looked at, for example, that are currently covered by the offences are things like breastfeeding, toileting, for want of a better word. But it's not black and white. And therefore, it's really, really difficult to differentiate between what is intimate to one person and intimate to another person.
Would you mind if I added in? So just, I think, to add in on this point, the committee's asked a few questions, and I know the previous panel discussed this as well, the difficulty in the content itself being in and of itself illegal. I think the comparison with child sexual abuse images and also with terrorism material has been run a few times. I think the difference is the offences, which will be the priority offences for the purposes of the OSA, have that consent element. So we've heard here how difficult that is because the images themselves, unless it is about an image that's been created without consent, it is very difficult for that content moderation, and that's why we'll be reliant on the Ofcom guidance and looking at how that is assessed. I think to do this in other circumstances for the types of images that you're talking about, those same considerations would be there, and it would be potentially even more difficult for that content moderation to happen.
Thank you very much. Catherine?
Thank you. Yeah, moving on to the subject of sextortion. I'm not sure who it would be most appropriate, Jess. So what is the government going to do to tackle the threat of sextortion from overseas by those operating overseas?
One moment, I have the exact data on this, but I will just find for you.
While you're looking it up, this is partly because it's very topical.
I've got a specific thing specifically around what we're doing abroad, which to your question, but carry on as you were.
Yeah, it was just to say that this is partly brought to life by a campaign called Fearless that's been launched recently, which I'm sure you know.
Yes, yeah, it was they were on the news heavily this week. It's funny because it's. I have to say, for somebody who has spent a lot of my life and career working in and around this space, this new particular threat that is really, really specifically targeting boys and young men is absolutely harrowing, I have to say, and most of it actually is happening under the auspices of sites, so basically social media sites that would be covered by the Online Safety Act. However, it is fundamentally a crime of both sexual abuse and also blackmail, and so the cases that have been in the news in the last week, a terrible case of Nigerian gangs. And so the National Crime Agency, which sits under the auspices of the Home Office, work incredibly closely with partners all across the world globally to ensure that we are looking at detection. And there have been examples. One of the most depressing parts of my new job is every day I read the NCA outline of the examples of people who have been found to have done these crimes and have been criminalised for them. But yeah, it's a global. There are global task force on child sex abuse, of which Britain takes a very firm role.
Thank you. Natalie?
It's terrible there.
What are the challenges facing police with regards to bringing criminal gangs overseas committing sextortion to justice?
I mean, the challenges are as they are for all types of. This is the same with CSAM. It's the same with human trafficking, and you will not do it unless you do it globally. It has to be done. in concert with other countries around the world. I mean, and most of the CSAM material, for example, or online terrorism as well, which comes under the... Most of this data is found by other partners. The vast majority of CSAM that comes into our country, for example, for local law enforcement, comes from the USA. So these systems, these international systems, are set up. But of course, it is very, very difficult for us to take action, not impossible, in other countries, and that does happen.
Just to follow up on Natalie's question, so will you envisage using, as this becomes more of an issue, sextortion, will you be using the existing systems that you have in place with CSAM, for example, or will you envisage that there needs to be a separate one?
It would entirely depend on the age of the person because of the CSAM legislation, but in lots of the cases, I think that the revenge porn helpline are the sort of currently seemingly the best repository for data on exactly what this is looking like, because now I think 34% of their caseload is now sextortion, and they were the people who first alerted me to it, in fact. But where it sits under, whether people are under 18, and this is across the board an incredibly complicated area of law, because again, if somebody is putting their images online, you can't consent as a child. That is an easy line to draw in the law. But look, it's a relatively new phenomenon growing, and is something that we are spending a lot of time thinking about exactly what needs to happen in this particular space. But at the moment, it would still fall on the lines of 18 and under.
And Catherine, did you have one last one?
Yeah, just one last one. The Molly Rose Foundation said that Ofcom's approach to sextortion is disappointing and will do little. So does the Online Safety Act extend those necessary powers to Ofcom to force social media companies to act?
Again, it does, only on the basis of the age of the victim of this crime. However, I go back to my original point about the hashing. I see no reason why for adult sexual abuse images or adult, the intimate image abuse, I see no reason why hashing technology couldn't be used exactly the same, and Ofcom will be and I would very much encourage the family of the terrible case of Murray. I would absolutely encourage them to be feeding into the consultation, even though it's a violence against women and girls consultation that will be being done by Ofcom. Absolutely, sextortion cases will form part of that consultation, and I would encourage them to take part in that.
Do you think that the cliff edge between a child and an adult is far too violent a drop, particularly not taking into consideration vulnerable young adults as well?
It's far too violent a drop in every single area where it happens, whether it's care work, whether it's housing, whether it's, there is so many things in society where the cliff edge of being 18 and actually 16 in some cases of the offences that we deal with, it's complex. The law has to draw a line somewhere, and I suppose the view is that it is to the point of view of protecting children and making everything the most robust it possibly can be for children. However, if the law is a brutal tool, then it is for those who provide services like governments to make sure that there is a softened blow. But at the moment, I see too many examples where that isn't the case.
Okay, thank you. David?
Yeah, thank you. A question to either or both of you. Obviously, I alluded earlier when we met some victims, we became very aware of the very deep mental impact that this has had upon them. And both alluded to the fact that there had been no therapeutic support for them as a result of obviously being victims and survivors of this crime. Are you aware of any therapeutic support, and if you're not, do you think there should be more that is being done to support victims
So we've already talked about what both departments fund in terms of victim support. The majority of it is done through the MOJ, so my department. We've got a rape and sexual abuse support fund which provides £26 million to over 60 specialist support organisations which offer tailored support programmes to all victims, including victims of non-consensual intimate image abuse. And that is there to help them cope with the disabling mental injuries that this is causing, that severe mental impact that it's having. We fund police and crime commissioners, as I've already said, directly from the MOJ so that they can provide services locally, provide that tailored support wherever they may need. So that is there. I think part of the problem here is around the awareness of the Victims Code, again, so that our victims and survivors are aware of exactly what they're entitled to, and we need to do a whole suite of work in terms of promoting the code, consulting on the code, is it fit for purpose, all of the things that we are doing.
Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Catherine.
Yeah, I think one of the... it's clear from today and for those of us that have worked in this space that violence against women and girls is an epidemic. I was really pleased to hear our representative from the police earlier saying it deserves the same attention as terrorism, right. And we must change our culture to absolutely deal with this. But obviously one of the areas that we haven't talked about much today is in schools and what we can do around education and how we stamp this out from the beginning. In our schools, and what you're doing in that regard, please.
For decades, though, we have sought to do very little other than basically tidy up a mess of crimes already perpetrated, and actually preventing them. I would say has become one of the sort of major pillars of the work that this government will seek to do. It was actually a forebear of this committee when I was sat on it myself, where this committee, the Department for Education, the Education Committee, there was about 8 committees of the House of Commons that said that we needed to have compulsory healthy relationship education, and that law came into law in 2016. However, I have to say that progress pretty much since the legislation passed, I would say, has relatively stalled in that space, with a whole history of things that have gone wrong, I would say. But yeah, we are working, I'd say that Alex and I, the department we work almost the closest with in our mission, and it absolutely will be the Department for Education. But what works to actually prevent this? We need to make sure that we are designing programs, that we are putting programs into schools that not only deal with all the different sorts of violence against women and girls, that deal with all the different sorts of safeguarding, but that actually have long-lasting preventative measures for the future, because at the moment I feel a little bit like what we do is we just do something because it's better than doing nothing, and we don't know what exactly works. So there is a huge part of our mission, of which Alex and I co-chair the Violence Against Women and Girls Mission Board, that will be about finding what that is and spreading it about, spreading it like muck.
Thank you. You've talked about changing the culture, I guess, and that's a huge piece of education. But one of the cultures that we have heard time and time about, again, that has failed victims and survivors is the culture of the police and the lack of infrastructure for the police in terms of regarding NCII. Survivors we spoke to also referred to a culture of misogyny. They were really blunt and very clear that they felt the police just did not care about it and even intimidated them at some stages. One survivor even told us that the police referred to her as a prostitute. What can we do? As much as we can train the individual police officers, what can we do to tackle the culture within the police with regards to NCII and VAWG?
We will achieve nothing in the criminal justice system unless we do what you have just outlined, and incidences of both police perpetrated abuses and also incidences of misogyny that have come to light in public in a number of cases are undoubtedly they're shocking, and we have to do everything that's possible. So obviously we're in the middle of two-parted inquiry, the Angelini inquiry, which was started, and in fact in the case of Sarah Everard, there is part of that, the story is an intimate image. That's why I say you can't separate the two. The first part of the Angelini, we have committed to ensuring that gets put in place in full, but we are awaiting the second part of the Angelini review, specifically about as well the issue of how not just police cultures and everything, but how police deal with the seriousness of this crime to stop it escalating to being, as was in the case of Sarah Everard, a much more serious sexual crime that ended her life. So, for the first time, there will be proper standards and vetting, both coming out of the Angelini and also from what the Home Secretary has set out about what will have to be the standards. Misogyny found within police officers will not be tolerated as part of a vetting regime that doesn't just vet you when you go in. What has to be created is a regime that has constant updates. There is another issue, I would say, about violence against women and girls within police forces, and that is about the for want of a definitely better word, the sexiness of it within police force. It's very appealing to do public order policing or policing firearms. We have got to make this something that police officers have to feel is the very, very, very core. So it isn't just getting rid of, the misogynistic bad apples. This is about making violence against women and girls something so core to policing that being good at it is the reason you get promoted.
Can I make a quick point on that as well? Because I wanted to make a political point, if I may. And it's around leadership. And we no longer, thankfully, have a Home Secretary that makes spiking jokes or a Prime Minister that makes sexist comments. We have a Home Secretary and a Prime Minister that have made tackling violence against women and girls a political priority, and that does really count for something in terms of how the direction of this country is going, the leadership, the political will to tackle this head on, and I think that's really, really important.
Thank you very much. I've just got a couple of points of clarification before we close the session. At the first panel, Sam Millar was very clear that it was not within the police's powers to remove or take a device or remove images off a device from somebody who had been convicted. It was a perpetrator could be given back their device, or quite often are given back devices, and the police don't have the power to remove those images. Is that your reading of where we stand at the moment, or is there clarity needed to be given on the guidelines?
I think in my previous comments around the courts managing to obtain the devices and getting the content removed, the Sentencing Council are looking at this to see whether the guidance needs to be clearer. But it is currently in the court's powers to take this. They can do it, and we are looking to see, the Sentencing Council are looking to see whether that guidance needs to be clearer.
Okay, because in the instance of CSAM, for example, that just wouldn't be the case, would it?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then wanted to come back to the fact that this is an international issue. And we will not be able to solve this problem without dealing with international actors. So if someone in Moscow uploaded the video of Georgia Harrison, for example, then ISPs in this country should be blocking them. Is that correct?
I mean, the examples where this has been successful was on some of the nudification apps. They had already stopped UK users being able to use them. That's right, isn't it? They had blocked UK users because of UK law.
Or the threat to create UK law.
We didn't even need to do it. Yeah. So the more we talk about this, the more... And actually, this is really important, like making tech companies be better and do better and carve out things for us. Whether they be in California or Moscow, it comes from us, even the threat of even a committee like yourself. So it's really, really important that we keep talking about it. But the answer within the regime is that it's still illegal content if it can be seen here.
Yes.
If the user is here.
The unfortunate thing is that they are not currently willing to do that. Microsoft and Google gave evidence, and they seemed very much of the belief of around context. And because it is not illegal in the same way that a child cannot give consent, they were erring on the side of caution. If it were made illegal in the same way child sexual abuse material is, they would not have that wriggle room.
All I would say back to them is it is illegal.
Okay.
It is illegal. You know, intimate image abuse is illegal. And it is considered so I would push back to them.
Come in.
Yeah.
Like, of course, we might not morally have got to the point where we find it as repugnant as child abuse. Although I have to say, sometimes I sit here and you would make out like everything was absolutely rosy with regard to tech companies and child abuse. Yeah. Just like to put a line there that says that's not necessarily the case. Like, they need that is a cultural thing that will have to come in as part of the new regime, because it is illegal. Terrorism, child abuse, sharing of intimate images have the same level in the bill, in the Act.
Thank you. Lorna.
Yes, just to add to that. So again, it's the non-consensual intimate image sharing, which is the offence, and that is what is being added as a priority offence, those sharing images. So I think my understanding of the way that interacts with the Act is that if it would be illegal, if it was happening in this country, then even if it is happening outside of the country, so if the image is being shared from outside of the UK, that would still be caught by the provisions of the OSA in respect to that priority offence.
Okay. Just to say that the information and the evidence that we heard from Microsoft and from Google, they are not treating NCII as illegal currently.
It isn't currently a priority offence for the Act, and that will be why. So, as the ministers have said, non-consensual sharing the images, that is illegal within the criminal law. The addition of that to the schedule for the OSA will then bite through the Ofcom.
The Ofcom guidance, the implementation next year.
So you're expecting to see that change. Will you expect to see that change from Microsoft and Google and other platforms?
Yes. Tell you what, I expect to see it change
now.
Today.
They don't have to wait.
Crack on. Once again, I'd like to go back to my previous comment that they could absolutely crack on today.
And if they were to not comply with that following the OSA and those changes next year, they could be open to fines.
Ofcom's range of powers that it has to enforce the Act.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions, anybody else? No, that brings proceedings to a close. Thank you very much. Order.